Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, we're going to go ahead and let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, if you are having any audio issues, there is a call-in number listed here on the screen. So for some attendees, it tends to work better if you dial in using a phone versus your computer. So if you're having any issues, we have the number right here. Next, all attendees will be muted. However, if you have any questions, we ask that you use the questions panel, which is typically located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will pause throughout the webinar to read and help answer any of your questions as we go through. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to you as well as published on our website. So let's go ahead and we'll get started by introducing today's speaker. We are very excited to have Chad Knutson here with us today. Chad is co-founder and President Chief Information Security Officer for SBS Security. Over the last 15 years, he has worked diligently to help hundreds of organizations identify and understand cybersecurity risks that allow them to make better and more informed business decisions. Chad maintains these certifications as seen here on the screen and has received his bachelor's degree in computer information systems and a master's degree in information assurance from Dakota State University. Chad has been a driving force in the development of the SBS Institute, where he has served as president for the last 7 years, or for 7 years, I should say. He is very passionate about cybersecurity training and education for everyone. So Chad, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is surely a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I appreciate an opportunity to share a little bit of what we've seen out there and leave you with some takeaways that you can use in your own business to start to tackle some of these issues that we're facing. And this webinar is perfectly timed, given everything that's going on in the world from a cyber war perspective. There's no better time to sit down with the rest of your team, your executive team. Maybe you've got a to-do list of things you wanted to get to on the cyber-related side of things. Now is the time to get started on that before any additional problems or issues come your way. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And if you have questions, please do post them. And I really look forward to seeing what you want to know. Make this as interesting and problem solving for you as possible. And if we don't get them as we go through the talk, we'll definitely catch anything at the end and go from there. So let's just get started. I got a lot to cover with you. I could take a couple days of your time if you would let me. So I'll try not to do that today. But let's talk about what's cybercrime, what's happening in that space. What does this look like? You know, one of the most, I wouldn't say common question, but interesting question that I get is like, what do you think, Chad? Is this peaking soon? When do we get our arms around this problem and it starts to get smaller? And I wish I had great answers for that. This is an issue that has continued to increase ever since SBS got started back in 2005. We had a real need to be a cybersecurity company then, and it's only more relevant today to do what we do and try to help people make better decisions, because there's so much crime and unfortunate loss happening. We've got to do more to address the issue. So, I know that 82% of all statistics are made up. So take the numbers for what they're worth to you. I tried to source some of my items. So if you want to read the full articles, you'll be able to click on in the handouts, the hyperlink to see some of this. But has it peaked? When's it peaking? I don't know. We had $3 trillion in losses in 2015 globally, $6 trillion in 2021, and they're projecting $10.5 trillion by 2025. And I think you can see that today when you're reading in the news about what's happening out there, how on a global scale, those numbers can really start to add up. And a point I want to make too is that cybercrime just isn't about what you need to do different as a business to protect yourself, because it's more than that. If a client of yours gets hit with a large cyber attack, that could have an impact on you in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's a great thing to sit down and talk about as a team is what would happen, obviously, if we get hit, but what about a client? What are our risks? What could be the impacts? What if one of our vendors or third parties we work with gets hit? How might that affect us in our business? And so it's really an ecosystem of businesses together that really need to focus in on this. So you might, as a third party example, maybe there's an IT service provider that you use to help you keep your computers and servers and network running. Well, what if they get hit with a cybercrime? Could they get into your organization? Or maybe it's a business partner you order product from that is hit. You know, what might happen to your business if they're unable to provide you what you need? So it's become a very interweaved, complex issue. And today, obviously, we're focusing on what you can do about it, but I wanted to keep that in the back of your mind and make it a discussion amongst your team. You know, how do we get our arms around it? And these are kind of the three moving pieces from my perspective. So I want to throw some more numbers around at you. If you follow this link, it takes you to Verizon. Yes, Verizon, they do more than cell phones. Here they are doing an annual survey amongst businesses to figure out, you know, how data breaches and incidents have affected them. So I pulled two of the examples out for you today. The one on the left is from manufacturing, and the one on the right, I apologize, I didn't label very well, but it's from the professional services, scientific and technology services sector. And so, you know, like accountants and attorneys and things like that might fall in that group. And so, what are these different sectors of our country's businesses facing? So over here on the left side, looking at manufacturing, you know, they reported 585 incidents and 270 of them that were considered data breaches. And I'll describe the difference between those two because it's kind of like Phillips and, you know, screwdrivers. You know, we use these words interchangeably a lot without really understanding their meaning, and that's actually a brand and not necessarily a type. But so I'll break that down for you on the next slide. And so of these problems, what were the patterns? Well, the largest issues were system intrusions. They got into your workstations, your servers, and caused damage. And the second one they list is the people. So they're going after you with social engineering. So phishing emails and phone calls are leading to losses. And then lastly, web applications. And how many of us aren't using maybe a new product or service that we're rolling out? It probably has a web component to it. It's the most popular way to deliver a software product today. And so who's doing this? 82% of the time it's external to your business. So it's a cyber criminal, it's a nation state sponsored hacking group. And there's a little internal threat as well, but a lot of it is outside the walls of your business. And what do they want? 92% of the time they want something financial. You know, money is cash is king to criminals as well. And what's in the data that they're stealing besides the money? So if they don't get your money, they get your data. What kind of data are we looking at? 66% of it is personal data. 42% of it is credentials. Those are your usernames and passwords. And so just to do a fun little exercise here, think about what your password is for Facebook. And I know you don't probably enter it very often, but if you can remember what it is, I mean, do you reuse that anywhere? And I'm sure you do. The largest majority of people are reusing credentials. So if they can steal credentials from your business, they can likely use those to log into other things that belong to those users. So this idea of stolen credential reuse is a growing issue to compromise organizations. What are we going to do about it? Well, they give us 3 suggestions. And when I get to some later slides where I talk about some standards that you can follow to secure your business, this uses the Center for Information Systems, CIS guidance. They've got 18 controls you can implement. And so they're recommending 3 of them here. First one, to train your people. The second one is to better control access to your systems and limit it down to what you really need it to be to get the job done. And the third item is properly securing the configuration. There's a lot of things you can shut off on a computer, on a server, on a website that you don't need running, so we can harden these systems to make them harder to break into. So you can see, the next set of statistics is just the same story for a different industry. So if you're not in the professional services or manufacturing industries, you can go out to Verizon and find the numbers that associate to what you're facing. And some of them you'll see are similar from sector to sector. This is a chart that they put together that shows the difference between incidents and breaches. So on the right side are the incidences. And an incident is anything that happens that has a negative impact to your company. So you get ransomware on something, that's an incident. Denial of service attacks, they're saying, is the most common incident that businesses incur. But not all incidents lead to or escalate to the level of a breach. A breach is now where sensitive data that you're entrusted with ends up in the hands of someone who's going to do something bad with it. So you can't have a breach without an incident, but you can surely have an incident that doesn't rise to the level of a breach. So you can see denial of service attacks, and to describe what that is, so maybe you have one phone line into your business for example purposes. If you have 10 people calling it at the same time, how many people are going to get through? Maybe one if they're lucky. So that's kind of the denial of service. You flood a website or an internet connection with too much traffic, it goes down. So on the breaches side, which have the most reputational harm, when you're now notifying people that their data has been stolen, the most common thing that leads to that is phishing. And I would say that's your number one and number two biggest cyber risk as a business is phishing attacks against your employees. And so I think these are just kind of useful in framing up what our biggest few issues are. You can see stolen credentials there on the breach side as number two again. So, but don't underestimate incidents either. Having a denial of service attack, while it might not lead to a breach, oftentimes it's used as a diversion. So they might have stolen money, maybe in a wire transfer from your organization, but they're distracting you by doing a denial of service attack. They're super easy to do. So hopefully those are helpful in understanding what we're up against. I wanted to go through just a couple breaches with you, and I'll keep these short, but a couple key points. So SolarWinds was a large breach that we had last year, and hackers got into SolarWinds. SolarWinds makes software to manage networks. Some of you may have used or used the SolarWinds product. They're very popular, Fortune 500 company kind of thing. And so, it's purported that the Russians were behind this, but any nation state could have been, where they break into SolarWinds and they put malicious software in the code, and then we all download it as a system update, and it infects all of our networks. So this was really done in hindsight for the purpose of intelligence gathering on the federal and state level, but it also affected a lot of us because we would get the infection because we did the update. I don't want you to think that updates are bad. Updates are good. You need to trust your products, apply the updates as soon as they're available to fix issues. This was just an abuse of that trust. And this being done by a foreign state is challenging because they have so many skills that likely go beyond the abilities we have as individual businesses to defend against it. My biggest takeaway though from this is, just as in life, we might not be able to prevent every negative outcome from happening, but we can plan to fail well. So when this happens next time, you're quick about responding. You know exactly the steps to take to rid your organization of something that's harmful to you. And in this case, they gave us a lot of great resources that we could follow. Step 1, step 2, step 3, this is how you remediate these issues. This was another big issue we had was Microsoft Exchange. That's the email system that a lot of us use. You might host this yourself. You might have a vendor that hosts it for you. This is not the same thing as the Microsoft 365, web-based stuff that Microsoft hosts for you was not affected by this. But for those of us who hosted our own, and use the web login feature of that Exchange server, there was a vulnerability that came out, and hackers found it first and were using it to do malicious things. And so we call it a 0-day because it was being used against us before we really had a patch or before we really had a chance to roll one out. So Microsoft was really quick about rolling out a patch and getting this problem fixed. But if you had already been hacked, patching it didn't fix the problem. So it's really important that you have somebody you can turn to in the event something like this happens. Maybe it's a managed service provider that you use that can help you remediate these issues. But we want to get patches applied quickly. And even though the SolarWinds story was through a system update, but in this case, the quicker we could get it out, maybe we could head off our own infection. And again, they had a lot of great procedures and stuff that we could use to secure ourselves. We also experienced one of the largest energy-related issues where the Colonial Pipeline, it's our largest pipeline in the US. It's been operational for 57 years, was shut down for the first time May 7th because they were infected with ransomware. They paid $4.4 million in ransom in the form of Bitcoin, which is the common currency to pay for a ransomware attack. And they were shut down for quite some time, and this caused a lot of pain for residents as well as businesses that were cut off from this petroleum source. And so we call this particular type of attack a dual threat, because not only did they get ransomware and were asked to pay the ransom, but they were also had all their data stolen, 100 gigabytes worth of data, that's a lot. And the hackers said, we're going to dump this on the internet, cause you all kinds of reputational harm and damage unless you pay. So the dual threat. So our best control for ransomware is to have good backups so we can restore to a clean state. Well, in this situation, good backups wouldn't stop them from dumping 100 gigs of data on the internet. So that's why it's kind of a dual threat example. But not always are these attacks so complicated that there's nothing any of us could have done to prevent them. Oftentimes, there's some very basic steps we can take. So in this one, some of the lessons learned are that they gained access to a VPN account. So a VPN lets, you can remotely connect into your business from home. Maybe you did a lot of that during the pandemic, and you can still work on stuff at the business like you were at home. Well, this VPN, they logged in using a stolen password. So that password issue we looked at with the Verizon statistics is being shown here. They knew someone's password and used it, probably stole it from another data breach somewhere else in the world. And not only did they use someone's stolen password, but the person didn't work there any longer. And so we can make sure former or terminated employees are immediately disconnected from all of our systems. And very rudimentary or very methodically do we track that and check those off, make sure all employees that no longer work here are disabled or deleted. My third point is the one that I'll make a couple more times yet is two-factor authentication. If they'd have had to have a cell phone with an app or a token, something like that, that they had to authorize, in addition to the stolen password, it would have made it a lot harder for the attackers to gain access to the Colonial Pipeline and infect it with ransomware. This is a source that I would hope you would follow. It's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's a heck of a tongue twister, but the government likes to do that. You can just call it CISA, CISA. And it's a federal agency that is part of DHS that's there to communicate information to us about what's happening. So this is an update from them talking in March about what's going on from a Russia perspective, understanding and mitigating Russia activities and threats against our critical infrastructures here in the US. So they've been warning us for months now that there is the possibility that Russia will retaliate against critical infrastructure here in the US. And I'll break that down for you here just in a second, what that means to you. But I wanted to give you a couple other examples. Here's another one that they just put out a couple days ago that lists different techniques and procedures that the Russians have used historically in targeting different parts of our infrastructure, like energy sector. So there's a lot we can learn for these. They have a lot of good steps to prepare. You'll see some similarities in my suggestions later on as to how to be ready. We're suggesting the same best practices as they are. But down here at the bottom is a list of other updates from them recently. Just like yesterday or 2 days ago, Sonic Wall, some of you may have a Sonic Wall firewall, had a big release security update that needs to be applied because hackers are actively breaking into them because of a vulnerability. And so if you go out to this website and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can put your email address in there and they'll send these out to you as an email, 5 to 15 of them or so, maybe a week. So these are a couple examples of different critical infrastructure that's out there. Obviously, your bank is an example as a financial infrastructure. There's healthcare. That's a critical infrastructure. Electrical grid, so dams, manufacturing, communications, lots of examples here. So you should know whether or not you are part of the critical infrastructure. For some of you during the pandemic, being part of critical infrastructure allowed you to travel when travel was restricted. It allowed you access to vaccinations earlier so that we could keep these sectors functional during that time. But these would be the places that Russia or someone like that might target when trying to hurt the United States, whether it's economical or financial, through crippling our banking system or taking our power grid offline, or petroleum again, like with the Colonial Pipeline example. So they've been warning us that these issues could come, and I really hope that they don't, but now is the time to be prepared for those. And if you're not a critical infrastructure, I mean, that lowers the probability that you might be affected by any cybercrime, but in particular, nation state sponsored activities like this. So I wanted to take a minute though and really highlight how what is happening with Russia and Ukraine could impact you. It doesn't mean it's going to, but we've taken disconnected Russia from the SWIFT networks, which is kind of the international wire transfer system. We've frozen assets of certain Russian political figures or oligarchs, and really imposed a lot of sanctions against them. So it would be only natural that they might want to retaliate and cause harm back to us by disrupting our economy, our critical businesses here in the US. So that's one way you might be affected, is if there's a direct attack against the manufacturing or energy sector and it affects you as a business. But it doesn't have to be something direct like that either. An example, so SolarWinds, that wasn't the first time that ever happened. If you remember, back in 2017, there was a funny name for ransomware variant called WannaCry, right? It hurt so bad, made you want to cry. And shortly after that, there was one called NotPetya. And it primarily affected the country of Ukraine. And supposedly, it was a Russian attack against the Ukraine. And the majority of businesses there used a company called EmiDocs to do some accounting and tax-related things. And they hacked in there and did the same thing where they changed the software to put some malicious code in it. It happened to be the NotPetya ransomware. And so the majority of businesses in that country downloaded it, and the ransomware executed, encrypted all their workstations. And guess what? The payment system didn't work. The decryption process didn't work because they didn't want those computers back in operation. It was primarily meant to disrupt the economy and cripple those businesses. So that's an example of a direct attack that I'm talking about up here. But indirect, there were businesses here in the United States that were affected by that. So an example, two of them I can think of, FedEx, right, big name. They had a subsidiary there in Ukraine that was compromised because of this, and then it spread into some of FedEx infrastructure. Or you remember, or you know of Maersk? They're the large shipping company. I think they do like 50% of the global shipping. They have a port there, and through that, it crippled all of their infrastructure globally. They were trying to coordinate shipments via WhatsApp communications. So I thought that was a good example of an indirect collateral damage to you. Otherwise, it just could be other cyber criminals, which are probably a more likely thing to come after you because there's a lot of them and they're just opportunistic looking for low-hanging fruit. But they might leverage some of this, what's happening over there to disguise what they're doing to try to break into your organization. So it's crime just attracts more crime, and I would anticipate number 3 to have a lot of activity in the months ahead. So I want to talk about some potential impacts here. In particular are some related to ransomware. These are just also a lot of common questions, like what's the average ransomware cost? Well, in the third quarter last year, the average was $139,000. A little bit less than Colonial Pipeline paid at $4.4 million. But this is the ones, again, that don't make the headlines. It's the average. It's what you and I experience on a day-to-day basis. And that is continuing to increase as an average. What probably is more unsettling is the average downtime is 22 days. So when you get ransomware, that's how long it might take you till you're at some sort of operational functional state again. And that decreased by 5%. So congratulations to us for getting better at recovering from incidents. 83% of these in third quarter last year involved that data exfiltration, the stealing of your information, the double threat that we talked about earlier. And so just having good backups isn't always going to prevent that exploitation of our data and that fear that they're going to dump it and make it public. And how would that damage your business? Some of you, it might cripple you. I mean, if you're a trusted, let's say you're a law firm and they took all your legal documents and dumped them on Google, that would be painful. And when you read the news stories, keep in mind, big tragedies make for big news stories. Like Bridgestone Tires has been targeted by ransomware criminals. But the average is businesses of 200 people. And, that's like you and I. These are small businesses and small communities in comparison. So 84% of all ransomware attacks are under 1,000 in employees. They just don't make great news stories, do they? Nor do we want them to. So let's not change that. How is some of this happening? On the left side here, it tells you that remote desktop protocols are one of the most common ways they're getting in. And so maybe during the pandemic, you opened up a connection into your business so you could remote in and do work. Well, they're finding ways to exploit that and take over those connections and do work for you in the form of ransomware. Phishing emails are the other popular way. On the right side, you can see that even broke down by business size. And I just want to emphasize the smallest of businesses, that 1 through 10 employees, that remote desktop connection is the largest chunk there in brown. And then phishing, as you get larger, becomes the biggest vector for breaking into organizations. Who's up to this stuff? Is it really complicated to do a ransomware attack? Absolutely not. Just like you can go out to Microsoft and pay for Microsoft 365 to give you email, Word, you just log in, pay a fee. There's groups out there that do that with ransomware. You just log into their site, they give you the ransomware, you target some people. When they get infected, the little dashboard over here will say, you've got 1 client. And then as they start paying their ransoms, it'll total up your collection, how much you've earned, and you just split the money with the company that's hosting the ransomware. So we're always trying to take these companies down, but they're hard to find and they pop up real quickly. And just some quick fun stats for you. I like stats and numbers, but 304 million ransomware infections in 2020, and that cost us 20 billion overall. And of those, then 65,000 of them were in the US. So that's 7 attacks per hour. 54% of them coming in through a phishing email. And we get 120 emails a day on average. And we need to know if every one of those 120 emails is fake or legitimate. And that's how I train employees is every email, you have to treat it like your business is on the line. Is it that important? You click the link or open the attachment. You have a decision whether or not to open that. Is your business worth it? And you do that 120 times a day. So if you're too busy to read your email carefully, don't do it when you're in a hurry. You'll make a mistake. You know, it's like cooking in the kitchen. You get in a hurry, you know, chopping carrots is a very regular activity, but all of a sudden you get a little not paying attention. It could be a finger that you get in there. So treat email with utmost respect and take time to read those carefully. They give us 5 tips, all of which are in my material here that we're talking about today. This was just another great resource from the FBI talking about best practices as it relates to ransomware. And we've really touched on, we've got to secure that remote desktop connection. If you don't work with a managed service provider or some IT company, I really encourage you to find one that can be a resource for you to help talk you through how to change that if it's an insecure setup. But we've got to have better backups that we take off the network. We unplug them so the hackers can't get to them. When they get ransomware on your network, their #1 goal, besides getting paid, is to stop you from being able to recover. So the first place they're going to go is to wipe out your backups. Have 2-factor authentication, that's the MFA, and patch your computer. So we'll touch on those a little bit more here in a second. We do a lot of work with organizations that have been compromised in all kinds of different ways. I have tons of stories, but I picked one out for you just to give some relevance to the discussion today on ransomware. This was a manufacturing company. It got a UPS email saying there was trouble delivering a package. I mean, they ship a lot of stuff in and out. So yeah, we probably need that component. And they clicked on it and got infected. And so immediately they took all their infrastructure offline to stop the ransomware from spreading because it was taking over everything. It crippled their organization so bad, I could not email them a contract and have them sign it and send it back. And we tried all kinds of different options, and we finally ended up sending it to an employee's Gmail, and we set it up with a digital signature for DocuSign, and they did it on their cell phone that was still getting internet from Verizon. So nothing through the business was functioning at all. They were down for 7 days with just their core part of their manufacturing. They made some really expensive aviation parts, and it was about $500,000 a day in lost revenue. So just those 7 days cost them a significant loss, and they can't make it up. Those machines are already working 24/7, 365 days a year. Those days are gone. Those contracts that they needed those parts for to be filled are now delayed. And so the ransom that they were asked to pay of $400,000 wasn't a big cost. So they tried it compared to the loss that they were incurring. And not always does the decryption process work. Sometimes it doesn't work at all. But this case, it was just really slow. I mean, by the time they got it all decrypted, they were better off just starting from scratch. It took them a couple more weeks to get everything to full operation, but after 7 days, they were able to get the assembly line components working, so at least the revenue loss was under a little bit more control. And so I probably have about 10 more minutes to spend with you is all, so I want to make sure, at most, I want to make sure I touch on what more we can do about this. And I know I sprinkled some tips and tricks in there as we went through those case studies. It's really hard not to just say lessons learned as we go. I would take any news story like that and make it a lessons learned. Everyone has a lesson. And when you learn from someone else's mistakes, it's the cheapest lessons you'll ever learn. When they're your own, they will be the most expensive. So I've got 3 resources for you. First is this CIS resource. I have a NIST cybersecurity framework and then a third NIST resource. But to explain them first, CIS, I think, is a little bit more of an advanced level set of suggestions. And they're more technical in nature. and they're really targeted towards reducing your cyber risk. So they kind of break them into basic, foundational, and organizational, and you can start with one and work your way to the end. And in each of these, they also break them down. So it's not just one step to do to inventory your first items here as an example. And there's probably like 5 to 10 components in each. So you can mature in each. So you can start simple and then you can grow as you go. So more technical examples of what to do. I would say a little bit more on the advanced side of things, but anybody can start with it. This is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, their cybersecurity framework. So this is a government resource where the other one was private sector. And it has a lot more process, like understanding your business, the risks you have, how much risk will you accept? It talks about training, detection and response to incidents, business continuity and recovery communications. So it's a well-rounded framework. This is a little bit more like what we use in the banking side of things when we work with some of our financial institution clients. But this is a good national standard for any business to adopt that I would consider as well. But this is the one I want to spend a little bit of time on. So it's also from NIST, so it's a federal standard, but it's 7621 and it's geared towards small businesses. And I really like the process they go through because they help us understand why we're doing this and what it is that risk really is and what is a threat and what are some of the things we can do about it. So I think it's a very foundational component to take a look at. They've got some spreadsheets and worksheets that you can go through in the process. So I wanted to pull out a couple suggestions from them for us to talk about. Every one of your users at your business needs to log into any system that you have with their own account. Everybody logs in with their own account. Historically, we've had a lot of people sharing an account, and that presents a lot of risk for your business. If a hacker gets into that account and becomes Chad, who's also John, who's also Eric, well, we've had to give that user all kinds of access so that Chad, John, Eric could all do their jobs. So we're giving away more access than we need. It's also hard to tell who is accountable or how did the issue start if I can't tell if it was Eric, John, or Chad that did it, or the hacker that used their account. So it helps to create some accountability by giving everyone their own account. And if you're working towards compliance with certain security standards, that's an absolute must. Every security standard will require every user to have their own account. Now, limit what each person needs to the bare minimum. And sometimes this is confrontational or causes problems with employees. Maybe there's a record they need to get 4 times a year, and now you took the access away. Just really sit down and think about it from the other perspective. If it's me, if I'm the user that we're reducing access to, and I click on a phishing email and a hacker takes over my account and becomes me, how much do you want to give access to that hacker? Well, you would want to give them as absolutely little as possible. I mean, you want to give them none, I understand, but they broke in, so they're going to have whatever I have. And so we want to limit somebody's access down to what's absolutely needed to do their job. And this also helps us comply with some of the different data privacy standards that are out there. Patching your computers and your software. I actually rather enjoy this. This is my Saturday. I'm updating my car and I'm updating my TV, and my Roomba vacuum cleaner, believe it or not, gets updates. Everything can use software updates. It's not just Windows. It's not just once a month. It's all the time. So Adobe, Office, your internet browser you're watching this on, all need updates. Anything that's connected to the internet or to your network needs updates. So that VoIP phone on your desk over there needs updates. Your security cameras, your firewalls, your switches and routers. And criminals will find a weak entry point if those are unpatched, and they'll break in, leading to that system compromise statistic from Verizon. Monthly has historically been an acceptable time frame. I really consider you to do this on a weekly basis. Try to automate as much as you can. Again, if you're working with a managed service provider, they can set all that up for you, so it's pretty seamless experience. If it's a really bad issue like the Sonic Wall one I just mentioned, or the Microsoft Hafnium problem with Exchange, within minutes or hours, we need to be applying those super highly published critical updates. And make sure you back up before you update in case the update breaks something, you can restore to a good backup. Train your employees. Like I said, I think phishing is your #1 and #2 biggest risk as a business. There's a lot of training software out there that does simulated phishing attacks. KnowBe4 is one of the really popular ones, but any of them do a really great job. If we train them on a monthly basis or every couple of weeks and send them fake phishing attacks, and they have to decide, and then we can train them when they get it wrong. Over time, this training has a great chance of reducing the probability someone will click. You'll never get to 0 clicks, but I'd rather reduce it to half as many or 3/4 less than whatever your click rate is today. Backups. Like I said earlier, this is your biggest defense against ransomware. So make good backups, test them. Oh man, I had an elevator that I worked with here a few years ago that had an issue, and they went to use their backups and they were blank. And the IT guy was even taking them to the bank vault in town to store them off site. They were blank. So test them, make sure they work. Get them off the network or use immutable or asynchronous. These are all fancy words for ransomware proof, but hackers are going to try to wipe them out and delete them and destroy them. So make that a better process. Some of you might replicate data between one system and another. Just know that when ransomware encrypts a file, it can replicate the encrypted file to the other location. So oftentimes replication is ineffective. The best practice is 3 copies of your data. One of them can be your production system. And so the other 2 copies should be on different kinds of media. So one's on a computer hard drive, maybe the other one's on a cloud storage. And one of those 2 copies needs to be offsite, and that would be the one I'd love to see offline or at least uneditable by your hackers. We need to do a better job with passwords. I think reuse is your biggest struggle. Don't use the same password on different websites. Get a password manager. Make each website or system unique. I put a couple of them out here. 1Password, LastPass, RoboForm, all good tools. Make them all unique. Use 2-factor to protect your login for those password managers. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and then give that basket to the hacker. So use 2-factor. Make them
Chad,
longer.
we actually have a question about multi-factor. What do you recommend, tokens or CAPTCHA, or do you want to explain the difference between those 2?
Yeah, so what I would suggest as the best, if you don't do any multi-factor today, convenience is important if you want your employees to adopt it. So some of them offer a push notification. So maybe you use Microsoft 365 as an example. When you turn on their 2-factor, one of the options is just the yes/no button that pops up on your phone. You can accept or deny the 2-factor. That's the easiest to get people to adapt to. The best ones would be where you type in a 6-digit code from the phone or a hardware token into a site. We want to try to stay away from text message-based 2-factor, but if that's your only option, I'd rather take text-based than nothing. But there's a way you can swap out SIM cards and steal someone's cell phone number and steal their multi-factor pretty easy with text-based. So hopefully that helps. But we just got to do a little bit better with our passwords. Our hackers are really using them against us. All I want to do here is encourage you to have a conversation with your insurance agent about cyber insurance. It might be expensive. You might be able to insure for parts of your business, not all of it, but talk to them about how this can help you. If you're losing a lot of money because you're down with ransomware, it doesn't undo all that impact, but it might financially offset the pain of it. And I've seen businesses go under because it was just too big of a financial impact. And so that's something you might be able to insure against. So have a conversation with your agent. And the last thing I wanted to mention, and if you had any other questions, I'll catch them after this, is, sit down and take some of these scenarios and just do a tabletop discussion with your management. We have a whole bunch of scenarios on our website you're welcome to use if you're not, if you want someone else to be creative for you. But sit down and walk through it. What would ransomware look like in our organization? Would we have the controls in place we need to? And if not, what do we need to do to get there? And so we encourage doing these kind of tabletop exercises on a regular basis, because building a better plan to respond when it happens, plan to fail and plan to fail well, and be really great at responding to minimize the impact. I use the analogy of a fire department that's highly trained, highly skilled, shows up. I mean, there's a fire, you can't stop that. I mean, that already happened, but they're going to get the fire out quickly and with the least amount of damage possible. If it's volunteer firefighters and they're not sure which hose hooks up to where, and I know they're trained too, that's probably a bad example, but when you're not as prepared for it, it takes you longer to respond and more damage happens during that fire. So just be as prepared as you can and use these examples as opportunities to discuss improvements. That is all I had, unless we had any other questions that we didn't get to.
It looks like our inbox is clear, so you covered it very well, Chad. Thank you. If anyone does have any questions that they think about, after viewing this webinar or any other matters related to your bank first relationship, please feel free to reach out to your local office. We will be sure to get in touch with you through whoever it is that you normally work with. Shortly, you'll be receiving an email with a hyperlink with access to this webinar, the recorded version of it, as well as a link to complete a short survey. So of course, we always appreciate your feedback and your valuable feedback. You will be entered to win a $100 Visa gift card. So that really concludes our webinar for today. And thank you very much. Thank you, Chad, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.